Ed, Edd and Eddy has always been one of my favorite shows. Like, the vibes of a timeless summer vacation has always made me feel at peace. Like I was somehow part of this cul-de-sac. Heh. He said Cole. But one thing I always thought while watching EE&E was that a lot of these scams weren't really scams, or at least bad deals by any means. For example, mowing everyone's lawn for $0.25 a pop, that's gotta be a hustle. But putting manure on everyone's lawn to grow them to then cut them is a scam. So today we're gonna go through the entirety of Ed, Edd and Eddy's first season and tally up just how many times the Eds truly scammed the other kids, and how many times they did genuinely good business for only a couple quarters or jawbreakers in return. Man, does anyone actually like jawbreakers? Episode 1A, the Edtouchables. Now, unlike Kids Next Door, which had an acronym for each episode's title, Ed, Edd and Eddy's titles replace a random word or syllable from a popular phrase or movie with the word Ed. I would argue that titles can sometimes be a little random, like this title clearly parodies the Untouchables, which makes a bit of sense as we'll see, but others are just really fascinating to me, like Laugh Ed Laugh seems to most likely be a reference to the 1928 silent drama Laugh Clown Laugh. The first scene of the whole show takes place in Double D's room, as we see how meticulous he is, labeling everything in the room, even how many ants are in his ant farm. We then meet Eddy, the troublemaker and mastermind of the schemes, as he ding-dong ditches Double D, and just listen to the sound this doorbell makes. I swear this sounds like a YouTube poop or something. Why did it make this sound? Double D can't find his magnifying glass and has an animated, somewhat realistic panic attack, but Eddy calms him down by smashing his bed over his head. Ed, Edd and Eddy does this really funny thing throughout the show with selective strength, like when someone's mad, it's not unlikely they can just pick up and swing a bed or a telephone pole. And to this day, I still wonder how Ed's parents removed his staircase when he got grounded that one time.
What happened to the stairs?
My parents took them down because I am grounded.
That's disturbing.
Speaking of Ed, the two Ed boys meet their third and final friend, Ed, and Ed's definitely the most different character at the beginning of the show compared to how I normally think of him. Like, I usually think of him as a loopy dude who spouts random phrases like buttered toast. Also, look at this introductory shot of Ed, it looks like it'd be out of an anime opening. We meet Ed's little sister Sarah, who beats the boys up because she can't find her doll and assumes the boys took it, thus beginning the very first scheme in the entire show. The Eds performing an investigation to find this thief wreaking havoc on the neighborhood. And speaking of capturing thieves, let's talk about a game where you do just that in Carmen Sandiego. Thanks to Gameloft for sponsoring this video. The Scarlet Super Thief Carmen Sandiego is back in a brand new puzzle adventure game launching March 4th on PC and consoles. You may remember Carmen as a cartoon in the 90s, and 40 years after her original debut, you can finally play as Carmen herself. Carmen Sandiego's gotta be one of the coolest characters of all time. Like, not only has she stolen priceless artifacts, but she's one of the only people to really rock a fedora well when you think about it. The game looks great, and I love exploring these 3D environments while also learning some pretty fun things about these locations I never knew before. Oh, I knew that. No, I knew that. Come on, give me another. Whether you're a longtime fan or want to get into the series for the first time, this is a great place to start, and the gameplay really has something for everyone. Now, to train your super sleuth muscles, I've hidden 5 different Carmen Sandiegos throughout this video, and you'll get a special shout out next time if you comment below the timestamps of all 5 hidden Carmens, with the very first getting an extra special shout out. Rediscover the thrill of solving mysteries with Carmen Sandiego. Click my link in the description or scan the QR code to dive in. So Eddy runs and tells that, convincing the other kids they're gonna find this serial toucher and bring them to justice.
We have to warn everyone that there's a serial toucher on the loose.
They set up Ed in the park with a sign on him that says "Don't touch" as bait for this serial toucher, and that's the last time I'm ever gonna say that phrase. Johnny and Plank show up, rubbing his board of wood on Ed, and I refrain from calling Plank Johnny's imaginary friend, despite him being a plank of wood, because Plank is just as much a part of this neighborhood as any other kid, and I truly believe he's sentient. I think the biggest indicator of this is Johnny uses Plank to look around corners or above shelves he couldn't possibly see himself. Johnny and Plank, along with just about every every other kid in the show is based off someone from creator Danny Antonucci's childhood, with Johnny and Plank being based off a kid Danny describes as being somewhat of a loner and had an imaginary friend in the form of a blanket, but you know, Linus already exists, so Plank was improvised. The Eds chase down Johnny, and in this chase we have one of the more iconic moments of the series, where we see how the different Eds approach this fence. We see Eddy jumps over, showing he's cool and agile, at least in comparison to Double D, who carefully opens the door, making sure to close it behind him, and Ed's a bit slower and more quirky, so he paces back and forth and then spins through this tiny hole in the fence. A 10-second sequence like this without any dialogue really perfectly described to me who the Eds are, which is a huge help in the first episode especially. Like, not only do I understand these characters now, but they do something hilarious you can really only capture in the magic of animation. When the Eds catch Johnny and Plank, they tie them up to a lie detector where Plank apparently lies somehow, and Eddy tortures the board of wood with a water gun that he says will make him swell up like a balloon. It never really occurred to me as a kid that Eddy could very well be waterboarding Plank in this scene, but it gets Johnny to admit that he's the culprit and is promptly stuffed into a tire and rolled throughout the neighborhood. So you may think this is a hustle and the Eds have saved the day, but Sarah returns and says she found her doll under the bed, and Double D even finds his misplaced magnifying glass, so there is no thief in town at all. That's right, Johnny admitted to stealing everyone's stuff because the Eds are so crazy. He said, whatever punishment I get for being a thief can't be any worse than getting waterboarded by these crazy kids. The episode ends with the Ed boys enjoying their jawbreakers, only for Johnny and his tire to be rolled down a hill by Sarah, knocking the Eds over as they chase their giant jawbreakers down the street. I think this episode has obviously got to be considered a scam, although it is interesting to note the Eds actually had good intentions. They just jump to conclusions and don't take no for an answer. Episode 1B, Nagged to Ed, it starts with Double D holding a little insect experiment, and I love this little slack-jawed beetle. When they go to the forest, Ed gets stuck in a giant spider web, which we learn is a trap set by the Kanker sisters, who are probably the most divisive characters in the whole show. Like, a lot of people think they're repulsive or bullies, if not worse, and I think other people feel they would have loved to have someone obsess over them when they were younger like this. I feel like a modern comparison I see of the Kankers is that anime Don't Toy With Me Nagatoro, a romance about a girl with a flesh fang who messes with this boy. And you'd think if a comparison existed between these two shows, it'd be with the Kanker sisters, but no, it's because Eddy looks like this girl, like she stole his whole flow. The Kankers are actually based off these two girls Danny knew in school, who he says were really intense and intimidating about getting boyfriends, so it's kind of terrifying to think the Kankers are roaming around this planet as we speak. We see the sisters drag the Eds to their trailer park, changing them into their father's bathrobes, and they got 3 different names on them here, which is a fun little detail. Like, it doesn't really poke fun at the Kankers, but may actually shed a little light on their behavior. Like, if they have different dads who are really in and out of their lives, maybe they're acting very motherly to the Eds because they picked this up from their mom. It's really funny that the Eds just totally gel with this new lifestyle, sitting on the couch eating burgers and drinking powdered milk while watching Fishbowl 2 on TV. This TV show we see throughout the show was actually a school project from one of Danny's sons, and when you really think about it, this has gotta be one of the most viewed school projects a kid has ever made. The Eds get too spoiled with this lifestyle though, even ignoring the girls until they get yelled at to do chores, until they're eventually kicked out of the trailer park to end the episode. Were the Eds scam artists here? I mean, they were hustling the Kanker sisters, but they're a scam of boyfriends. So while one could argue this would be a non-applicable episode to the scam hustle spreadsheet, I don't want to start off this video with a non-applicable, so you know, I'm actually gonna have to call this a scam. And if you think you're getting scammed by watching this video after that decision, argue with me in the comments. This is a hustle you're watching right here, you know. Episode 2A, Pop Goes the Ed, starts with Eds messing with the beehive as a be gone service, and when the beehive gets smacked and they run away, we see Eddy run inside and close the door on the other Eds, which is like the most messed up moment of the whole show. There's a lot of times throughout the show I wonder if they'd be better off without Eddy. Like, would Ed and Double D just be friends with the rest of the neighborhood? Danny Antonucci mentions in the interview I showed earlier that Double D would be fine on his own, a piece of himself Danny put into the character, and while that may be true, this trio really does feel like they make each other happy at the expense of the rest of the neighborhood, but you just can't help but root for them sometimes. The neighborhood experiences a summer heat wave, and we learn the neighborhood love interest Naz is holding a sprinkler party. You know, I always wondered why her name was Naz, like if it was short for Nazareth, but it's actually a reference to a band Danny liked called the Naz, a rock band that formed in the late 60s. In a way, this is a perfect name. Like, Ed and Eddy pays homage to a lot of animation from the 40s through 70s, and growing up in the early 2000s, people didn't understand animation nearly as much as they do nowadays. Like, one of the questions I hear about this show the most was, do you think the squiggly outlines are intentional? Nowadays, it's really funny to think about, cause it's impossible for me to watch this show without saying, wow, that is so well animated. And Danny actually says in this interview from 2002, the style is kind of a jab against CGI, and he didn't want the show to look too slick. The Eds show up to the pool party anyways, and Eddy climbs up to do some acrobatic sprinkler stunt that is actually kinda cool, I won't lie. The swimsuits the Eds have are from Eddy's older brother, and are too small so they fling off, and Jimmy even drinks one. Nah, that's crazy. The Eds jump in the pool to hide the fact they aren't wearing shorts, and the last thing they should be doing in this situation is splashing haphazardly. The Eds stay in the pool until everyone else goes to sleep, and the fact they've absorbed all this water is such a gross, hilarious detail I never really thought of. We end the episode with the Eds standing up in the pool and running home, using it as a shield, clothing. It's a really funny episode. Mr. Antonucci even mentions it was based off a real experience he had as a kid, reluctantly going to a pool party and having his two small bathing suits snap off. Which makes sense, like this plot does feel really oddly specific, like I would never even think a bathing suit could even have a malfunction like this. Are the Eds scamming or hustling here? I mean, the only service we got is the Beehive service, and we don't know who this was for, but I'm gonna have to say hustle. Like, their service aimed to get rid of a beehive, and they did it. Sure, this probably wasn't standard procedure, but it is what it is. Episode 2B, Over Yer Ed, starts with Double D in the bathtub with the loofah, and I don't want to post it on YouTube. The Eds make an energy drink Eddy puts way too much sugar into, Double D takes a sip out of, and starts running around the neighborhood. The episode does a great job of telling you just how much sugar's in here when Double D says Ed's bowl had too much sugar, but when you think of what just got put in, like that's gonna be 10 times smaller than the bag Eddy just put in. Panera Bread lemonade that kills you, eat your heart out. It's not Double D hyped up on sugar that destroys the stand, but Ed's clumsiness, and I love that Ed manages to save all the lemonade and then just forgets, turning his head back. Eddy decides it's time to make Ed cool for a change, taking him through an Ed wash, and then back to Eddy's room where we see the Closet of Dreams. Eddy has such an interesting room, like he has this long ass closet, but he's got this big round bed that looks really comfy, a record player and Barry White and Tom Jones records by his bed, even a door in his room leading to outside the house. So they give Ed this swaggy jacket, and Double D ghostwrites sayings for Ed to seem cool, and to be fair, they are pretty cool.
Swiggity swag, what's in the bag?
So with Ed's newfound popularity, they make an Ed show where he's up on stage just yapping, and this has gotta be a hustle. Really, the only thing that prevents this scheme is the Kanker sisters walking into the show and exposing Ed for being fraudulent and non-nonchalant, just pushing him around, and I feel so bad for Ed here, like come on. Anyways, I wouldn't change this to a scam just because it didn't work out here. Like, you put someone like Nate Bargatze up there, and the Kanker sisters are just gonna ruin his performance too. They're an unstoppable force that I must remind you is wandering around the real planet Earth right now. Episode 3A, Sir Ed-a-Lot, starts with Eddy impressing everyone washing a random sports car and pretending it's his, impressing Naz and shutting out Kevin, who bangs on the window like that one meme. The Ed boys go to Ed's house to grab him, but they can't find Ed in his room. While Eddy's room always was the coolest to me, Ed's room always felt like the hangout spot. Like, I feel like I know this room like the back of my hand. They'd always slide in through this small window, but they can go back out either through the window or the staircase, assuming Ed's parents didn't ground him and take it away. Ed's really got it all down here. His own bathroom, tub included, a washer and dryer, and a bunch of furniture falling apart, like this couch with an arrow shot through it, or the peeling walls covered in monster movie posters. They finally find Ed upstairs, forced to dress pretty for Sarah's tea party with Jimmy, and when Eddy threatens to take Ed, Sarah blackmails them by threatening to die. Yeah, she holds her breath until she's purple, and it's pretty disgusting. Sarah and Jimmy then race on Eddy and Ed through the house, and this is really the first time we get to see power scaling in the show of who's more powerful. Like, my main interest in who wins this is just to see who's stronger, which is obviously gotta be Ed. Also, look at Jimmy, he's kinda dressing here. I love the sequence of Eddy juggling all the furniture in the room, like he really is a talented entertainer when you think about it. When Ed throws tables and cacti into the mix, Eddy can't keep up anymore, which gives Sarah the idea to just just go crazy and start throwing everything around, which Ed would get blamed for as her babysitter. Eddy and Double D cover their tracks by just wheeling in a drawing of the room with the happy kids all in there, and you know, the parents are never around in this show. Like, the sad thing is, it's possible Ed's parents may never even see that this room's destroyed. It can be a little eerie at times, like even when the Eds go to school, they don't see any teachers, let alone adults, spoilers. But I think it's more to just capture the vibe of parents not really being around during the summer, assuming they're at work. Quote, take the Ed's parents factor. Their means of communicating with him via sticky notes. My parents worked long hours, and they left me written messages in much the same way. So yeah, this is gotta be a non-applicable. Like, one could argue they scammed Ed's mom with not watching her responsibly or something, but there wasn't really any business to this. And let's be real, no one can properly babysit Sarah when she's like this. Not even that one randomly mean substitute teacher everyone had that was worse than the regular teacher. Yeah. Episode 3B, A Pinch to Grow an Ed. A play on the phrase, a pinch to grow an inch, you know, like growing an inch taller on your birthday.
What was y'all thinking?
This is pretty relevant to the episode, as Eddy's self-conscious about being a short king. Double D invents a pair of platform boots for Eddy, who walks around the neighborhood, stepping on Kevin and blocking Rolf's shots. But similar to last episode, the Kankers walk in and expose the Eds for being frauds. The episode ends with Eddy's boots launching him all the way into space and getting knocked back down to Earth, with Eddy landing in Jimmy and Sarah's baby carriage, leaving Eddy appearing to be even smaller and younger than when he started. Eddy does have a point about being tall would make him appear more successful and in turn help with schemes. Like, a business suit definitely helps elongate the figure, making one look taller and more successful, and no one would call that a scam really. I think this is just a non-applicable that could have led to a scam or a hustle in the future. Episode 4A, Dawn of the Eds, starts with the Eds dumpster diving for glass bottles to recycle for cash, which is absolutely a hustle, but Eds get distracted by a poster for a new movie called Robot Rebel Ranch, a rated R movie they can't go see obviously. The Eds get stranded in the junkyard and need to find shelter for the night, and me and my friends always talk about how this show made us think junkyards would be some cool hangout spot for us as kids, but in reality it was only really a thing we would see in cartoons. The Eds aren't able to escape this desolate landscape, even with this rocket prototype Double D builds, and the episode ends with the Eds taking a final stand against these robot monsters in the junkyard they start zapping, which is revealed to be an illusion inside Ed's head, and these robots are actually Jimmy and Sarah grabbing Ed because it's time for dinner. It's not too complex of an episode, but I've always loved the vibes of this one. Like, the Eds really made me want to go play in an empty junkyard as a kid. A fun slice of life sewed, so let's move on. Episode 4B, Vert-Ed-Go. Okay, this is probably the least creative title. They replaced a syllable in a word with Ed, but you know what? It's a great title card. Like, look at this bird. The Eds grab a quarter that fell down a grate and it gets stolen by a bird. We rarely see animals in the show that don't belong to Rolf, and it's always funny in large part just because they look like normal animals. Like, Wilfred looks a lot like an Ed and Eddy character, but these birds or this dog could have been from anything. The Eds see an ad for a clubhouse and get the idea to make their own treehouse and need wood to build this, so they steal Plank, saving his life if he sells out his fellow wooden brethren, which is pretty messed up. Hashtag justice for Plank. The treehouse is a bit shoddy, but honestly not bad for a few kids. The flyers promote stock car racing and yachts, which is clearly out of the Eds' budget, though they say it'll be possible with the entry fee, and it's pretty obviously a scam they just try to run off with. Though I was ready to defend the clubhouse, cause like, at the end of the day, it's a social service, or like a neighborhood community center. Do you think Eddy would run an HOA nowadays? The episode ends with the Kankers conquering the club, now as Club Kanker, and I forgot just how often the Kankers expose the Eds' fraudulence throughout the show. So I think the false advertising and empty promises gotta make me mark this one as a scam. Episode 5A, Read All About Ed, starts off with all the Eds sleeping, and we see Ed doesn't sleep with a blanket, but curls the bed onto himself like a blanket, which I always associate with the memes of like when you sleep over at a friend's house and they don't give you a blanket. This is really the first time we've seen Double D's room since the first episode where he lost his magnifying glass, so it's probably a good time to point out how Double D labeled everything in his room, from the chair to the rug to wall, earth. I feel like the labels in Double D's room are often used as has evidence to suggest he may be neurodivergent. I looked through the series Bible Danny Antonucci created when pitching Ed, Edd and Eddy to networks, and Double D's page is relatively tame, though it is interesting to note he describes Ed as having attention deficiency syndrome, or ADHD. The series Bible, which can be found archived online, has a lot of fun and random facts in it, like the fact Rolf is a first generation of an immigrant family, and that his nationality isn't important. While Rolf's nationality is often speculated, like some suggesting he could be Romanian because of his red, blue, and yellow color scheme, or the fact that he's the son of a shepherd, which people may loosely associate with Romania. In reality, Rolf's character is pretty heavily inspired on Antonucci's own upbringing, whose experience growing up in Toronto clashed together the modern world and the 1950s Italian world. So while I'd argue Rolf is supposed to be Italian, I think his culture's a lot more deliberately mishmashed, possibly in part because Danny's last cartoon, Lupo the Butcher, was questioned for its depictions of Italians more directly. Anyways, this episode follows Double D doing a newspaper route throughout town to save up for a telescope. Double D goes to one house where he bumps into a dog who bites his sock, and it's really weird to see a dog in Ed, Edd and Eddy. Like, I love all the animals in this show so much, from Rolf's goat Victor or his pig Wilfred, but a dog just looks so out of place, like it's in a totally different style, but I love him so much. Eddy gets an ingenious idea to create a newspaper launcher to quickly send newspapers to every house, but it covers the neighborhood with newspapers when Ed doesn't think before stuffing Eddy's bed into the cannon. Ending the episode with the Eds picking up all these newspapers in the street before getting another trunk load dumped on them. Is this a scam? Well, it didn't meet expectations, but the idea was pretty genius until Ed messed it up. It's like calling newspaper deliveries on a car instead of a bike a scam if they got in a car crash. So I'm actually gonna have to call this a very poorly executed hustle that would have gone totally right if Ed didn't mess it up, probably. I think if the Eds had a more malicious intent behind this, I wouldn't be opposed to calling it a scam, but I think they just got a bit unlucky with Ed being so chaotic, combined with their desire to always cut corners when possible. Episode 5B, Quickshot Ed has the Eds wreaking havoc with a Polaroid camera, like the Flash knocks Kevin off his bike and blinds him throughout the episode, and gives the Eds the idea to make a calendar to sell to the other kids. Even though Eddy says this in a conniving way, photography is a legitimate business, although their methods of photography are a bit sus. Like, they try to take photos of Naz up in a tree, or barge into Rolf's shed where he turns himself into a Costco hot dog, ultimately resulting in the Kanker sisters catching the Eds and giving them a makeover. We then see Sarah uses this picture for the month of June in her calendar. I assume Sarah took all the profits from this calendar if she was actually selling it and not just posting it on a tree solely for the sake of being a hater, but it's a really funny ending. Like, you know, the Eds at least kind of see now how their photography can go too far. At the end of the day, I still think it's a hustle, and I think season 1 leans more towards genuine ways to make money, usually interrupted by the kids' own immaturity or the Kanker sisters' involvement. Eddy's greed hasn't gotten too far out of control yet compared to later down the line, so let's see how it plays out. Episode 6A in Ed Too Many has the Eds looking for a 4-leaf clover so they can get good luck, because good luck means being able to scam people. Ed doesn't find a 4-leaf clover, but this random rare flower, and the way Eddy says, "What's with this weed?" will always make me laugh. Like, not as a Rick and Morty 420 joke, just like, no, actually, what is this weed? Double D gives said weed to Sarah, and I guess this weird flower is an aphrodisiac that causes her to fall in love with him, or maybe it was just the way he nonchalantly gave her this flower. Like, that was actually so tough. Jimmy gets mad Sarah left him for Double D and goes full Sigma mode, destroying the flower and devouring his teddy bear. Jimmy's always been one of my favorite characters. Like, as annoying as he can be, he's just so entertaining to me. Antonucci actually mentions Jimmy being directly based off his cousin, who he describes as precious, delicate, and spoiled rotten. He also describes him as being more comfortable hanging out amongst the girls than guys, and it also says they'd tease him and his ears got bright red when he was upset. So even Jimmy's angry blush is likely based off an aspect of Danny's childhood. Like, this man lived Ed, Edd and Eddy, and is just showing all of us who weren't as fortunate to live a TV show. The Eds are making a giant dinosaur they plan to charge admission to see, and this is just amazing. Like, I have to say it's a hustle. This is beautiful sculpting. The Eds are really talented when you think about it. They just put so much effort into trying to be lazy, and the rest of the neighborhood has some pretty crazy kids. The Eds find a way to calm down the wrath of Sigma Jimmy and get rid of the disruptive, loving Sarah, reuniting the two and throwing out their cursed 4-leaf clover, only for Johnny 2x4 and Plank to just pick it up and immediately find a $20 bill, which, may I remind you, in the year 2000 would be a little over $36 today, I'm just saying. It's a bit of an odd episode compared to the typical formula of the show and falls a little more under the slice of life category of episodes, but I'm gonna count the dinosaur sculpture Sarah ruined as a hustle in progress she delayed the production on. Episode 6B, Ed and Seek. This episode has all the neighborhood kids playing hide and seek, and the kids win by just touching the home free tree. Now I don't know about you, but as a kid, half the time we called the home base home, and half the time we called it goo. Kids also called it manhunt if you could move during the hide and seek like this, probably to be like, Mom, we don't play hide and seek anymore, we only play grown-up games like manhunt. The Eds take care of the home base tree by rolling it with them in a wagon as they search the neighborhood, along with these heat-seeking goggles. And even with these two forms of cheating, Jimmy's nearly able to make a clean getaway at home base. So Jimmy's it now, and I'm almost surprised the other kids continued to play with the Eds. Like, they don't like them, but as a kid there was multiple times you'd see kids do something like this, and then when they got caught, they'd say, you know, I just don't feel like playing anymore. I don't know if I can ever forgive them for that. The Eds have this like aluminum bush, which I guess has been here for a while, because they didn't put it here in the episode, and it's the perfect hiding spot if they didn't bring all their snacks and soda, fizzing it up and exploding the whole spot, leaving the Eds to scramble around for hiding spots. The most crazy spot has gotta be Ed hiding inside a black and white cartoon on TV, not only paying homage to an older era of animation the show's creator is very fond of, but also showing that Ed has not only super strength, but can distort reality by blending the real and toon worlds. Did I mention the Kanker sisters are in the real world? So the episode ends with the Eds running out of their spots and jumping on the home free tree, which is still in the wagon, which rolls away, and they meet their fate of getting endlessly concussed by Ed and this tree, punishing them for their cheating throughout. While it isn't a business, I think cheating in hide and seek is pretty scam-like behavior, so this is going in the books as a scam. Let's move on. Episode 7A, Look Into My Eds. This episode starts with the Eds running a bus stop, taking advantage of Ed's super strength. Public transit isn't a scam. Well, it kinda is with how bad it can be in some parts of the US, I guess, but I gotta mark this as a scam because it was so bad and dangerous, they ended up giving a refund to all the kids for crashing. So I'd have to say a bus with no brakes is a death trap and a scam. Double D gets a psychology book in the mail and shows Ed a Rorschach test, and this is where the notorious Double D facts meme comes from. They're usually not that good, like this one that says pineapples on pizza is disgusting, and I would like to say I am a pineapple on pizza defender all day. Like if we're gonna argue about butterscotch and Brussels sprouts, we might as well continue the food arguments with Hawaiian pizza too. The book also has a hypnotizing wheel they use on Ed, causing him to realize his passion deep down for becoming a ballerina. The rest of the episode's hypnosis widely revolves around animals, like Eddy telling Kevin to become what Eddy's always wanted him to be, which is a monkey. They also turn Sarah into a frog, and I like that you can just be hypnotized into changing your whole anatomy in the Eds universe. They put a giant projector in the middle of the cul-de-sac where they get the hypnotized town to all give the Eds quarters, and the only thing that prevents the Eds from taking over the whole neighborhood, if not the whole world, is the Kanker sisters showing up and Lee having hair over her eyes. So the episode ends with the Eds now as dogs tied to a tire outside the trailer park, which is probably one of the most grim endings to an episode we've gotten so far. Is this a scam or a hustle? Well, money was exchanged and it wasn't exactly legal / consensual, so this has obviously gotta be a scam. Episode 7B, Tag Yer Ed, starts with the Eds eating a bunch of Chunky Puffs, their favorite cereal, but they don't have any milk, so they go to Rolf's farm and mess with his cow Beatrice. Kevin and Rolf laugh at Double D for being dorky and frail, but Eddy's determined to get him to not be a wimp anymore. Double D takes on his alter ego as the Masked Mumbler, and it's kinda crazy to think there was a masked wrestler in a cartoon before Mucha Lucha, and you should totally check out my videos on the series after this. I even talked to the creator of Mucha Lucha in my most recent video. Things are going too well, or at least moderately well, so the Kankers show up and ruin everything in this tag match, and it's kinda fun to note that although Ed is one of the most powerful cartoon characters ever, he can't hit a girl, so he just tags Eddy in, eventually getting all 3 of the boys tied up in a ball. It's kinda interesting to note the whole neighborhood's here watching this. Like, I almost have to call this a hustle for the Eds, cause they'd be great jobbers in professional wrestling. Like, I kinda doubt the rest of the kids would be watching this fight if they thought the boys were gonna beat up the gals here. It just goes to show, sometimes in business, you gotta play to your strengths, even if your strength is weakness. Episode 8A, Full on the Ed. This episode focuses a lot on pranks, like Eddy pulling the hilarious prank of dropping a motor on Ed's head, or leaving skates out for Double D to trip on and fall out a window. Eddy gets so full of himself here, he says he can prank the whole cul-de-sac, but before they can prank Rolf, they see he's already been stuffed into a barrel by this mysterious prank master. The Eds watch in horror as the whole neighborhood gets serial pranked before their very eyes, with the Eds too paranoid to leave the house anymore, even ignoring a perfectly good jawbreaker on the ground they feel is probably a trap. In a great twist, it turns out the prank master was the rest of the neighborhood working together to prank themselves to mess with the Eds, and it's pretty effective. The Eds kinda lose their minds, wedging each other in front of everyone, but Eddy knows the perfect way to get revenge, as his older brother taught him how to make the El Mongo stink bomb. This is the first time we've heard mention of Eddy's brother since the bathing suits he's owned before the mishap at Naz's pool party, and funnily enough, Eddy's character sheet in the pitch bible from years before this episode came out specifically mentions Eddy's brother teaching him about this stink bomb, so in reality, they probably had this idea for years. The episode ends with a giant stink bomb ruining the time of everyone, showing there's no winners in war, and this episode has gotta be marked as non-applicable, like there's really no hints of a scam or hustle, just kids pranking each other. Episode 8B, A Boy and His Ed. The Eds dig a hole they fill with water, presenting their newest idea, a drawbridge they try to scam Kevin with. We learn Kevin's dad has a new job at the Jawbreaker factory and has a garage full of them, giving them out for free, and he claims at least he was going to share these with the Eds, though I kinda doubt it. I didn't hate Kevin as a kid, but rewatching this show now, I find Kevin a lot more unlikable. It's great for the Eds to have a rival, so I'm glad he's here, but yeah, he's just usually so mean, and I think the most enjoyable Kevin moments are when the Eds mess with him, maybe because I'm not really rooting for either side and literally anything could happen. Maybe the Eds will win, maybe they won't. The Eds try to dig into Kevin's garage, but their calcs are off and end up in the tub with Kevin, who flushes them all down the drain. Trying to be Kevin's friend for a jawbreaker is a scam, or at least dishonest when you think about it, and they didn't even do it well. So this, combined with the drawbridge, results in a fun episode that I gotta rule as a scam. Episode 9A, It's Way Ed. This episode is all about the Eds desperately chasing the fads of the neighborhood, like walking on stilts, and look at this crazy transition. When you think about it, this episode's pretty real with how it treats fads and peer pressure. Like, Ed and Eddy have always been very specific about not being too preachy to kids with fluffy, teachable morals, but this episode still shows the Eds' desperation to fit in with their community, and how chasing these trends often leaves you a step behind. Like, when the Eds make their own stilts, the rest of the neighborhood has moved on to whiz-whacking with these tetherball helmets, which do be looking kinda fun. The Eds Frankenstein together a combo of all the fads so far, becoming the Fad Freakers, a term me and my friends use regularly, like if I buy a random Steam game cause Northern Lion played it once because FOMO. As far off as the Eds were, they kinda got a bit of the vibes of the current trend, like they had springs in their design, which is the new hustle. But ultimately, the kids tried to hustle the hustle and the fad got freaked. No one really likes their new fad, and to make matters worse, the kids suddenly get into fad freaking as soon as the Eds stop. So I think I gotta call this one non-applicable. Like, the kids hustled poorly, but it's really not enough of an enterprise for me to feel strongly about determining whether this may be a poorly executed hustle or a typical scam. It's more just kids trying to fit in. Episode 9B, Laugh Ed Laugh. The Eds have an ice cream truck, which seems like a hustle, but we learn the ice cream they sell is actually paper cones, glue, and baseballs, so this has obviously gotta be a scam. Though if I were playing devil's advocate, this probably has less microplastics in Red 40 than what we eat nowadays. I shudder when I think of eating a gluey baseball. That's like biting into a candy apple. Ugh. The neighborhood's empty because everyone's quarantined with chickenpox, showing the Eds really need the rest of the neighborhood around, and they're kinda lonely family without being able to scam the other kids. Eddy gets so stir crazy he even starts scamming squirrels. Nah, that's nuts. Double D and Ed have to confine Eddy because of how crazy he's become without the ability to scam, leaving all three of the Eds stuck in a not-so-solitary confinement, as the rest of the neighborhood has recovered from the chickenpox. This episode is just scam after scam, although they were victimless scams when we look at the baseball ice cream, but I can't let that slide. That's gotta be the most malicious scam so far. Episode 10A, Glass of Warm Ed. Double D hears a sound downstairs in the middle of the night, which turns out to be Ed's hungry ass eating all these chain link sausages and pickles. He raids every kid in town's fridge, even eating the cucumbers off Naz's sleep mask, and Eddy finds this whole situation hilarious. And this episode's where the great Eddy laughing gif comes from. Eddy gets the genius idea to set up a grocery store for the neighborhood who's all been eaten out of house and home, and this has definitely gotta be a scam. Like, stealing food just to sell it back is kinda messed up, and I haven't even mentioned the fact that the food is being grabbed out of Ed's stomach. Yup, that's a scam. Episode 10B, Flea, Bitten, Ed has a very interesting dog on the title card. The Ed's plan is to make a pet boutique, so they go to Rolf's farm, and it's always interesting to see the animals in Ed, Edd, and Eddy. Like, Eddy polishes the butt of Wilfred the pig to the point he can see his own reflection in it. Double D's actually really good with the chickens. Like, it feels like clipping their nails should be a little bit more of a challenge than this. Ed has a lot of allergies in Ed, Edd, and Eddy, including bunnies, which causes Ed to break out in rashes and balloon up, nearly flying away. Dr. Double D walks in to treat Ed's allergies, and while they're able to cure Ed from the bunnies, they were multiplying behind the scenes, taking over the whole neighborhood. The Eds taking care of all these animals started out as a hustle. Sure, Eddy cuts corners like just kicking a sprinkler under Victor the goat, but I think it's a dang good bargain. Really, all that went wrong was Ed's allergies, and they could rearrange who does what next time. And even though this is the case, I think letting the bunnies go was irresponsible, and this would have to end up as a scam that a business would most likely be forced to refund, in addition to the damages done from this. Overall, a scam that should have been a hustle. Episode 11A, Who, What, Where, Ed. The Eds are making omelets, but Ed accidentally smashes all 39 eggs. Yes, I counted them all. Like, the only reason they don't just turn Ed into a jawbreaker here is because the time of this episode, releasing a dozen eggs was $1, not $5. Like, Ed just casually dropped a $20 bill if this episode came out today. Anyways, the Eds go to Rolf's house to get an egg, but Rolf will only trade an egg for sawdust. The Eds could just saw this big tree for sawdust, but as we know, the Eds are willing to expend any amount of energy to be lazy, so when Johnny and Plank show up, Eddy threatens to saw Plank, who once again squeals on his wooden brethren, revealing Kevin's got sawdust in his shed. The funniest part of negotiating with Kevin is that Kevin was trying to get rid of the sawdust because it was part of his chores, but instead of charging Kevin to remove this, they appear too desperate, so Kevin's only willing to get rid of it if they paint his shed. I love the hater energy that Kevin would rather both sides suffer than give to the Eds. But to be fair, you never know what the Eds are gonna do to ruin everyone's day. I wouldn't want them to have sawdust either. The funniest part of this series of convoluted trades is they trade Rolf Ed's yo-yo for plums, to trade for a giant teddy bear for a badminton racket, and so on, but like, they probably could have just traded Rolf the yo-yo for the eggs straight up. Or they could have just sawed their own sawdust. I think I have to call this episode a scam, if not just because the Eds are so bad at hustling, but it is a pretty fun episode I feel we've seen some spiritual successors of, like the bartering episode of Chowder. Also in the end, Ed opens the egg to let the chicken free, causing this whole day to be for nothing, but hopefully the Eds learned a valuable lesson here. It's either scam or be scammed. In episode 11B, Keeping Up with the Eds, this episode starts at Double D's house doing chores from sticky notes left by his parents, which Danny Antonucci actually mentions is from his own experience growing up in the summer with his parents working long hours and leaving messages for him in a similar manner. Ed goes crazy on Double D's lawn with a push mower, ripping half the lawn and fence down, and while they're handy enough to fix the fence, the only way to get the grass back quickly is with Montezuma's free-range manure from Eddy's house. This manure grows super fast, giving Eddy the idea to throw it on everyone else's lawn and then get paid to mow it, and just so we're all on the same page, mowing lawns, hustle. Growing people's lawns and mowing them, scam. The grass grows way higher than they anticipate, and they sign a contract with Rolf in order to borrow his goat Victor to eat the neighborhood back to normal.
Are you there, Sarah? Sarah! Cool.
Victor? The
The goat ate Sarah! The goat ate my sister!
So Victor eats all the grass, and they roll this giant goat ball back to Rolf's house, ending the episode stuck in a mud pile as they avoid getting chomped by Victor. This episode's a really fun look into how a scam really isn't dictated by whether or not the action is serviceable or not, but rather the Ed's intentions behind the scheme. Episode 12A, Eds-Aggerate. Once again, the Eds start by making a place of entertainment, their own amusement park, Edland, but Ed pushes his chair too hard, slingshotting Eddy into Kevin's window. The Eds blame this broken window on the Mucky Boys. That's not monkey like the animal, but M-U-C-K-Y like they're covered in muck. The whole town begins hunting for the Mucky Boys, so without any leads, the Eds would naturally get blamed for lying, and instead of fessing up, the Eds will always double down, dressing as the Mucky Boys and getting exposed as liars and window destroyers. Kevin traps the Eds in a block of cement, but Johnny, being the bro that he is, brings the Eds a cake with a hammer in it, but it gets stuck to Ed's face, so who knows how long they were stuck in here for. While it's not a business, the Eds try to pull off a pretty elaborate scheme/lie, which just feels like a scam to me, especially if you throw in the monetary value of Kevin's window they broke. Episode 12B, Oath to an Ed. The Eds get new clothes, and they're really stiff, but kinda swag, like this muted palette goes kinda crazy. The Eds bring their new clothes down to the lake to soften them up and get them comfy, which actually disintegrates the clothes in the lake. I don't know if this is a result of Ed's spin cycle being too fast, the clothes being too cheap, or maybe the water is so acidic it just destroys the new clothes. But without them, the Eds are especially tempted by Johnny's cool uniform to join the Urban Rangers, like the Eds version of the Boy Scouts or something. The Eds are so bad at being Urban Rangers, they can't even put a burrito in the microwave without getting impatient and cooking it too high and having it explode, and I will say the intent behind the Eds' actions, as well as the results, play into the verdict of a hustle or a scam sometimes for me. Like the Eds are really only doing these activities for the uniform, but they're impatient, stupid, and nervous, so I lean scam for something done haphazardly solely for grabbing a uniform, except for the last chance the Eds have, which is giving a pie to Sarah, who's just awful and rude, and I can't blame Eddy for crashing out here, it's not his fault. But you know, they had 4 chances before this, and he can't even put on a toilet paper roll properly, so the Eds get their bandanas removed by Rolf and are sentenced to the Walk of Shame, which is essentially a large slip and slide. As much as I want to call this one a scam, something doesn't sit right about calling the Eds mostly well-meaning effort failing and being called a scam, but it's also like such a failed hustle, I think I actually have to call this one non-applicable because it's not really a business, but more of a slice of a life applying to a club. Also, I don't really feel like getting into the semantics just yet of a well-intentioned scam or a poorly executed hustle. Episode 13A, Bitten, Yer Ed. Eddy swallows a fly and loses his voice, and with most shows, an episode like this may be a little annoying or a little boring if their actions or the other characters' dialogue isn't funny enough to carry the plot and humor, but this episode falls in a really unique spot where it's carried heavily by the amazing sound design of the show, spearheaded by an amazing library of sound effects.
Disabling his ability to talk.
I think the most important thing to observe when looking at these sound effects is there's nothing too crazy about them from a technical standpoint. It's not like something like SpongeBob where every squeak and step really shows off the characters while also being consistent, but rather the timing and decisions in Ed, Edd and Eddy's sound design are perfect. Like taking a look back at the Eddy clip of him making the squeaky crying sound when he gets his hair pulled, this scene wouldn't have been nearly as funny if a different sound effect from their library was used, like the yodel or the sumo.
Disabling his ability to talk.
Rolf passes by and claims to be able to understand Eddy, which he clearly doesn't because he forces Eddy to eat these squids and sausage, or thinks Eddy wants to go synchronized swimming, or thinking Eddy's cold and needs a winter wonderland in his room by just shoving an open fridge into his wall. Eddy ends up facing his biggest fear, at least according to Rolf, which is stepping into the ring against a rooster, and when Eddy pulls the cape away, the chicken gets its beak stuck in plank, allowing Johnny to run off to free a chicken from Rolf's farm. Eddy ends the episode finally getting his voice back while being stuck in a tree, and it's kind of funny this is really one of the only times we've seen Eddy end an episode in an unfortunate situation like this that I really don't think he deserved based on his actions. Like in the grand scheme of things, Eddy will be paying off his karmic debt for the rest of his life, but I also kind of assume that just resets episode to episode, and you gotta really be doing something bad this time before you get your just desserts. Real quick, I wanted to give a quick thanks to my Patreon and Ko-fi supporters. Thank you Mode8FX, Robert Rock, Buggy, Flinley, Paul H, James Bond 3W, Luther, Richard M, Jack C, Jakira, Jeffrey R, and PK Kirby. Thank you so much. It's viewers like you that really help me make these videos, but also thank you to anyone who's out there checking these out, especially those of you who are liking and subscribing. Moving on to the final episode of Season 1, Avast Ye Eds, the Eds make a giant tire swing and Double D gets launched into the river where Eddy has the idea for a luxury cruise line in the form of this giant tire. Also, they use Ed's mom's stove as the anchor, and this episode really feels like the start of the classic E&E formula where they really focus on the scam and just how many people they can profit off. This is also the episode where we see Double D going to town on the pedal steel guitar, which is one of the funniest and most random moments of the whole show. Something about this moment was where Double D became my favorite character in a way. Like, I can relate to him in a lot of ways, being more dorky or what little things bother him, but it's also like, dang Double D, I didn't know you were chill like that. So the Kanker sisters ruin this crew as pirates with the sole duty of grabbing the Ed's booty, but Ed can turn his mouth into a motor, and seeing this actually land in the water and launch the boat down the river looks so good to me. It's actually Johnny and Plank that save the day. Like, Johnny is really that guy. Like, that's Roranoa 2x4 right there. May goes Sniper King mode with this bobby pin and deflates the Ed's boat, leaving Johnny and Jimmy to walk the plank, which is so messed up. And then the Eds get their booty taken, sorta, so the episode ends with the Eds defeated, handing Rolf what's left of their deflated tire boat thing. I feel like an episode like this makes a lot of sense why people don't like the Kankers too much. Like, the Eds weren't really scamming the other kids here, they just kinda derailed what would have probably been a good day for everyone. Sure, the Ed's boat idea had the intention of making money, but this episode feels like a perfect example of the Eds being creative entrepreneurs who had to deal with the crazy kids around them, like the Kankers. I think as a kid, 25 cents for a makeshift river cruise would have been a great deal, and if you think it's cheap business, they used and probably ruined Ed's stove as the anchor, so this is actually a relatively cheap price of admission when you think about it. I'm actually gonna mark this as a hustle to end Season 1, so let's tally up Season 1's final results. Now, removing the 6 non-applicable episodes, the results are surprisingly close, with a total of 12 scams to 8 hustles. While scams ultimately comes out on top here, it really surprised me just how genuine the Ed's efforts were this season. So I'm really interested to see how different these results will be in the following seasons, cause the business ideas get better, but they also get more greedy. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you next week. Alright, bye.